Welcome back to the Nikki Clarke Show. I'm your host, Nikki Clarke, and I'm so excited to be back with yet another stellar interview. And today on the Nikki Clarke Show, we welcome Oxana Lapchuk. She's an author, an educator, and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor whose life story bridges history, faith, and resilience. Born in New York City and raised with a deep reverence for Ukrainian heritage, Oxana carries forward her father's powerful World War II journey, one marked by survival, displacement, and unshakable hope. Her work brings history to life, not as distant memory, but as a living testimony that speaks directly to the challenges of our world today. And through her book, public talks, and community engagement, Oxana invites us to reflect on the past, confront the present, and choose courage, truth, and compassion for future generations. Oxana, it is indeed an honor to have you with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Nikki Clarke, Dr. Nikki Clarke. I am honored to be on your program today and very excited to share, first of all, my heritage. Even though I was born in New York City, I grew up as a Ukrainian American. And my father, from an early age, sent me to Ukrainian school to learn Ukrainian culture, how to read and write in Ukrainian, and the history of Ukraine, because he was a Ukrainian freedom fighter. He was also a journalist, but a Ukrainian freedom fighter. And that was his vision, his purpose. Although he also believed in fighting for freedom for other nations as well, and had become involved in a in a group called Americans to Free Captive Nations. So his purpose in life was basically to fight for freedom. Um, and what I'd like to share, because of the fact that I was able to learn Ukrainian, years later, I was able to travel to Russia, Ukraine, Europe, Israel as an interpreter. And that was a great experience to be able to travel and to interpret and to see, what many of these people, particularly the Ukrainians, because I went there right after what they called the perestroika, after they became free. And they became free. It was in August of I think it was 1991 when they actually became a free nation. And that is why, and I'll share later why there is such an intense desire for freedom, because Ukraine has been free such a short time in its history. I mean, initially they were free for 3 years from 1918 to 1921. And then, of course, in 1991, where they were free for 31 years before Russia came and invaded Ukraine, which actually started in 2014 because they took the Crimea. So it's been an ongoing thing, and that's why so many of the Ukrainians are fighting to the very death because they don't want to lose their freedom. And my father had that kind of spirit in him, which helped him to survive the camps because he was in 4 different concentration camps.
Mm, excellent. Well, let's talk about that, Oksana. Um, Thank you for sharing a little bit about, your Ukrainian history and culture, your roots. But at what point did you realize that telling your father's World War II and Holocaust story was more than a family project and that it was something you were called to do?
It actually started, I don't think I would have done it, but it actually started with a dream. I had a dream many years ago that I gave birth to a beautiful baby, and it was chunky, it was laughing, and and of course I was too old to have children, but I felt like God was telling me He wants me to write this book. my father's Holocaust experiences because it would encourage and give hope to many people. And so I am embarked on a journey. And being that my father was a journalist, I actually had a lot of his journals and one of the books that he wrote about his experience from the first person. So the book, I called it The Journalist, a Holocaust Story. And the reason is because he was a journalist, he was able, from his perspective, and that's how I wrote the book, from his perspective, and I just filled in the gaps. Now, when I realized that God wanted me to write this book, I had to go to do the research at the camps because I did not have the right timeline. So I was able to go years later to some of the camps that he was in. One of them was in Buchenwald.
Mm.
And most of everything there is destroyed. You know, there's not much left there, no barracks, nothing. But I was able to meet with the people in the archive memorial department, and I was amazed at the documents and the personal documents they had of his transport, of his personal information. And I would spend an hour with them. And all of this is in the book. And they actually took me to the spot where he slept. It was called Block 63.
Wow.
And that to me was just the fact that I was actually standing on the very spot where he spent his time there. Now, he was not there very long. He was there only 3 weeks because they were preparing him to go to work in the underground tunnels in Dora Mittelbaum, making V1, V2 rockets for the Germans. And that's probably why he survived, because he was in the little camp, which it was even worse than the big camp in Buchenwald. It was very difficult there. I mean, they literally were cramped in these um, blocks, and they had no windows. I mean, it was just horrible. So I think the fact that he got out when he did was truly a miracle because of the fact, although it wasn't easy working in these underground tunnels, and I did get to see, because they opened them in 2006. And I was stunned. They gave us a tour of these underground tunnels in Dora Mittelbau, where my father had to slave and work, sometimes 14, 18 hours a day at the conditions. And it was damp, it was wet. I mean, you could hardly breathe down there. And that's why they called it the Hell of Dora, because many of the people that were sent there as slave laborers, a lot of them used the Ukrainians, the Poles, the Russians, they could not survive those conditions. Many of them died. Fortunately, he did not sleep in those tunnels, because many of the prisoners did sleep in the tunnels. He did not. He slept outside, and I think that's one of the reasons why he survived working in these underground tunnels. Now, I do want to mention that after I wrote the book, um, I was contacted by a woman whose father appears in my book. Uh, it was amazing. I would have never known. And she said, "You're not going to believe this, but that is my father." And sure enough, it turned out that they were arrested together in Ukraine, and that they were in two of the camps together. Now, unfortunately, her father did have to sleep in those tunnels, and he did not see the sun literally for 6 months. So you can imagine what that must have been like, for someone to work in these horrible conditions. So that actually was interesting that we've met, and the fact that her father also became a part of this journey as well with my father, even though it was brief. because they kind of separated after Buchenwald. But anyway, it was just interesting how she found me on the internet and found the book. So, yeah. So anyway, I would like to share also that my father, and I don't want to give away the whole story because I would prefer for people, to order the book
Mhm.
it's on Amazon. You can get it from the publisher, Sunbury Press. Um, but he actually escaped from the baggage car that he was in, literally being shuttled to his death because the Allies were coming. The Nazis were trying to get rid of all the inmates. So he was able to jump off. And I just want to read you this, which so touched me because after he was able to run from the cable car into the forest, because there was a dark forest there, this is it's just two sentences. He says in the book, I finally found myself in the forest. I fell on my knees near a pine tree, grabbed the trunk of the tree and kissed it as I wept profusely like a small child. It seemed as if the forest began to speak these words to me: freedom, freedom, freedom. So you can imagine, him being enslaved all those years in the different camps, what it must have meant like to him to get out of there and feel like he's finally free. But that's only part of the journey because he had to run through the forest, dodging Nazi soldiers, and that's all in the book, his whole saga of how he was able to finally, get out from under, that oppression that he was under for so many years.
Mm. That's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that part of the book. Let's mention the name of the book again and where people can purchase it.
It's called The Journalist, A Holocaust Story. Right now, it's currently on Amazon for $14.95. It's in paperback, Kindle, and audio format. And also, they can get it from my publisher's website, Sunbury Press, PRESS.com, sunburypress.com. And
Mm.
what's interesting about it, a lot of times after people are liberated, there's a whole saga that goes with that. Not too many people write about that because you got to realize a lot of these people were displaced.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, they lost their families. Um, my father, they had told him that his wife and two children were killed, which he found out later was not true. They were alive. So here he was having to go through this whole scenario of trying to get his life back. And because he was Ukrainian, and at that time, Ukraine was not recognized as an independent country, he was considered either a Pole or a Russian. So he couldn't even go back. And if he did, the communists would have shot him
Mhm.
because he was a journalist and he fought so much against the communist regime. And of course, when the Nazis came, here they found themselves fighting on two fronts, not just the communists, but the Nazis as well.
Mhm.
So, and he had lived under this oppression, the communist oppression, and Stalin, I don't know if many people are aware of it, Stalin had actually orchestrated what they call murder by starvation, where millions of Ukrainians starved to death. This was in 1932 to 33. So this has been an ongoing battle with the communists, and many of them thought that the Nazis were going to liberate them, but the opposite happened. So it was very hard for many of them, like my father, who now found himself facing no country, um, wandering, trying to find his way. He also, what he did was he had to wind up living what they call a DP camp, a displaced persons camp, because he had no country to go to. But the interesting thing was that in 1948, President Truman passed the Displaced Persons Act, and my father was able to immigrate to America. That's how he wound up in New York City, and that's where I was born.
This is remarkable. You shared a lot about your dad's experience, which is just truly incredible. But what was it for you as the daughter, emotionally and spiritually? What did you learn from all of this?
Okay, it was, put it this way, it was a very interesting childhood because my father had a purpose and he had a vision. And I grew up with that, realizing how important that is because, the Bible says that without a vision, the people perish. And I
Mhm.
think because he had this vision that he wanted to live, and he kept confessing, I must live, I will live, I shall live. It was so strong inside of him that he knew that he had a purpose to fulfill. And unfortunately, what I learned was when people lose their hope and vision, like in the concentration camps, many of them would go and throw themselves against the electrified fences just to die. I mean, what a tragedy. And the reason he survived was because he had this vision of his life that he wanted to accomplish to continue the fight for freedom, even in America, which he did. Now, one of the things I learned from him was that vision gives you purpose. And he was so consumed with this vision to the point where everything else was secondary. And it wasn't that he wasn't a good father, he took care of us, but he literally was willing to lay down his life. I mean, I saw that. I mean, he was bold, he spoke out, and that's probably one of the reasons why he was arrested by the Gestapo because of his writings, against the communists and then the Nazis. So I saw as a child that how important that is, and that his inner strength somehow raised him, the strength that he had inside of him because of that strong purpose and vision, raised him above his outward faith and what he was experiencing. And Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. So because he knew his purpose and he knew that's what he was created to do, I think that caused him to fight and somehow overcome. And you got to realize when he jumped off the baggage car, he only weighed 80 pounds. So you can imagine how is that possible that he was able, by the sheer human strength, to be able, to survive. Now, we discovered another document that he had written just recently. I was stunned, and I just want to share this because it's the anguish of what he's saying here. Um, and it was right after he got out of the camps and he called them factories of death. And he says, day and night, the crematoriums burned. We wondered, when will our turn come? The days, weeks, months, and years passed, and nothing happened, or nothing changed. And he said people died from hunger, exhaustion, working 14 to 18 hours in the underground tunnels. And they just replaced them with other slaves. And he says, no rest, no sleep, just work, constant work. And he said many times they would wake him up like 3 a.m. in the morning. So the anguish of it, and I'm thinking, here they had no clue when they were, if ever, they were going to be liberated. So it's this constant monotony. And how did you survive that? I can't even imagine, the fact that somehow that inner strength in him caused him, to overcome the weakness of the body. And somehow he just kept speaking to his spirit and speaking to himself that he is going to make it, that he's going to survive. And because being in that situation, is it no wonder that many of these uh, concentration camp prisoners gave up hope and just killed themselves because they just couldn't handle it anymore. And it's not like they had a timetable telling them when they were going to be liberated. They had no clue. They could have been there forever for all they knew, you know. And the name of that document that he wrote is called Why is the World Silent? You know? And so to me, it was very touching, to read that, yeah, those words, because it makes you realize the anguish of being a prisoner and what it must have been like. Now, he also, I wanted to mention this, he was a witness against some of the SS officers. Now, this was not the Nuremberg trial. This is what they called the Dachau Dora trial, which was in Dachau, and it was done by the U.S. military. And this was in 1947. And one of the men there that he was a witness against was named Erhard Brownie, and he was the concentration camp SS officer. And he spoke about how not only did he beat the Slavic people like the Russians, Ukrainians, but he beat the Jewish prisoners with rubber hoses and clubs. And he would cut the rations of the Jewish prisoners and go into these anti-Semitic rages. So, he was there. Of course, he didn't speak English at the time, but they had an interpreter where he was able to be a witness and point them out, as perpetrators, as being commanders, and how terribly they were all treated.
Wow, that's a powerful testimony of your father's supernatural strength.
My intent is to give the readers hope that no matter how severe or challenging times that they're going through, that there is always hope. And with God, nothing is impossible because I believe, even though at the time he was not a religious man, I believe that the providence of God somehow intervened. And even though if your situation looks hopeless, you know, there's no reason to totally give up hope. And I feel like if you turn to God, if you somehow um, puts your hope and strength in Him, like there's a scripture that says, I look unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord. And there was even a situation where he was arrested by the Gestapo initially, and they were going to execute him. And I remember him thinking, well, this is it. This is the last hours of my life. And they put him in prison. He fell asleep, and he actually had a dream of a church all lit up with a cross on top. And when he woke up, he said, you know what? I bet that's a sign to me that God is telling me I'm not going to be shot. I'm not going to be executed. Sure enough, they told him, no, they're not going to kill him. They're going to send him instead to a concentration camp. So there are these kind of signposts along the way, where God intervenes, miraculously. Um, Even though, the circumstances are so severe and dire, but let's put it this way. Most people today, unless of course they have a serious illness, are not facing death or extermination. So if a person such as my father can overcome with death facing him every day of the years he was in the camps, and he was able somehow by speaking to his spirit and confessing that he will live and not die. And, I feel that I want to encourage readers that um, there definitely is hope at the end of the tunnel, no matter how bad or severe your circumstances are. And that's why I believe that it would encourage people, to realize that if someone who was a Holocaust survivor had to overcome all these things, and we're talking about years, we're talking about several years, 3 years pretty much, then we can overcome, just through our faith and believing that somehow God will make a way where there seems to be no way.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that incredible, powerful story. I look forward to reading the book. I'd love to get a copy. And tell us again the title and where we can get a copy of this powerful testament of strength.
It is called The Journalist, A Holocaust Story by me, by Oxana Lapchuk and Valentin Koval. Because again, I took many of the excerpts from his journals, and it makes it so much more real because it's coming from his viewpoint. It's what he suffered. It's what he went through, and I just fill in the gaps, to get the timeline. And again, you can order it on Amazon. It's about $14.95. And as I mentioned, it's in Kindle, paperback, and audio format, and also through the publisher as well. And if you're interested, you can read. They have my story of it started with a dream on their website, sunburypress.com, where I go, it's about 2 pages read, where you can read about how I came to write the book and all that was involved in the journey and all that as well.
Excellent. Oksana, it's been truly an honor to have you here on the show, sharing this powerful story, what your father witnessed, and sharing his testimony of just, miracle after miracle. He is a living miracle, and being able to return to New York City and to have established a beautiful life with a family, a thriving family, and you being able to tell his story. That is just so beautiful. Thank you for this time. And I look forward to connecting with you another time. Are you on social media? Can we reach out to you there?
Um, I don't have a large presence there, but I'm working. I'm working on trying to um, maybe have a bigger presence on social media yeah. So yeah, you can reach out to me there and or we can connect at some point. So I just want to tell you what an honor it's been to be on your program and that I was able to share my father's story. And there's so much more because we are working, possibly, we don't know whether it'll happen, maybe considering a second edition, because so much more material has been uncovered since I wrote the book, which it has been several years, and then including um, Tanya's story, which her father, who was the one that was with my father in 2 of the camps, and incorporating some of that in the second edition, as well as we wanted to kind of maybe talk more about the Ukraine-Russia war that's going on. So we'll see. I mean, that's a possibility that there may be a second edition coming up.
Well, I think that'll be very well received. And again, thank you for everything you're doing to push humanity forward. Many blessings to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Oksana.
Thank you so much, Dr.
My
Nikki.
pleasure. All
You
right. You've been listening to Oxana Lapchuk, an incredible story of her father's strength, surviving the Holocaust. So please get your copy of The Journalist. You can reach out to Oksana on social media, and we hope to have her back with the second part of her incredible story. And I wish you an incredible day of transformation, upliftment, and education. You've been watching The Nikki Clarke Show. I'm your host, Nikki Clarke. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you. You take care.